So I have a number of things I could do. And I'm trying to say, just take my filter. Here are the things I like. Here are the things I absolutely don't want to have in my sort of professional investment. Now the hard things are less concrete. They're more abstract. They're more philosophical. It'd be great if we had a family business at the end of the day. But at the same time, that would never be an expectation for my kids. That might be an opportunity for my kids, but that would have to be something that they would want to lean into.
You are 20 to 30 years into your career and figuring out what retirement might look for you. And so you're wondering for yourself, is that just travel? Is that just hanging out at the golf club? But really what you're asking yourself is what next? Well, today we're here to talk about refiring and not actually retiring. Welcome to Career and Mission Growth. Welcome to my guest, Kristen Simmons. I'm super excited to speak with Kristen. Let me tell you a little bit about Kristen. She is a chief everything. She's done it from chief executive, chief operating, chief customer experience office, and she was doing a customer experience long before customer experience was even a thing. So you're going to hear from somebody today who has climbed through the career jungle gym, has climbed to the top of the ladder, and is now helping people as an advisor, working on boards, and the odd piece of work inside of organizations that are on the fast growth path. Kristen, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm great, James. Thanks so much for having me, and I appreciate the generous introduction.
Okay, so let's jump in. We're going to talk a little bit about refiring, not retiring, but I want to start off with this because you and I have talked a lot in the last few weeks about family and life, and particularly connecting and integrating those two things. Mm-hmm. Just tell us, how are we thinking about life now, having done 20 to 30 years in our corporate life, and we've come out and we've helped some fast growth, innovative companies. What does family and life connection and integration mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's, as you know, that's just at the center of kind of this chapter of my life and kind of this pivot that I'm doing. I'm trying to figure out, what I definitely am not retiring. I have as much energy as I feel like I've ever had, and I am eager to do more, but it's like, what's next? Like you said, kind of have gone through, the corporate ladder, so to speak, and taken on a lot of those different types of roles and had a few different chapters in my life. When my kids were younger, I had 10 years there where I worked out of my home and was a consultant. So I've always tried to kind of adapt my career, to my life in a way that might make it more flexible or palatable. But I'm being extra intentional about it now. I'm almost starting from the outside in and saying, I want to look at my family and my life and my sense of purpose and work back to the job. Instead of trying to make the job fit those things, how do I select the work I'm going to do and be intentional about that by thinking first about purpose and meaning and family life? As an example, one of the things that really had me sort of leave full-time work for good, I believe, is that my dad his health took a turn in 2023. And actually most of that calendar year was pretty rough. Started with a heart attack in February, double pneumonia, went to congestive heart failure, ended up in a wheelchair from some bed sores. Wow. The whole year was incredible. And he's on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, and tried to visit as much as I can and was really helping from afar and trying to be their healthcare Sherpa, if you will. And it was really scary at times, but rewarding and meaningful. And so it wasn't about just leaving a full-time job so that I have more time to go out there, although I do try to go for a week about every couple months. But I also am looking professionally at aging seniors and their family caregivers, because folks like you and I find ourselves at this stage in life, we're kind of sandwiched between, you've got kids who in my case are a little older and they're beginning to go into that adulting phase, both in college, and then my parents who are aging and just, moved to kind of independent senior living a few years ago. And right now we're in great health. I'm happy to say my dad bounced back. 2024 has been amazing. He just told me a week ago that he thought he had another 10 years, and we celebrated his 95th. So if he's got 10 years, that is exactly where I want his head to be. So as I start to look at things in the seniors and caregiving space, there are a lot of problems I believe are unsolved because people in our generation find themselves in a situation. It's enough to plan for kind of our own lives and our own retirements, we don't know when that unexpected thing is going to happen with our loved ones. So that has really caused me to shine a light on that as business opportunities. So I've been kind of pursuing that. And I feel like the smarter I get about what's going on with aging seniors and caregiver support, the better I can do at being a caregiver. And likewise, I feel like the time I spend with my parents and their doctors and their friends and their challenges would make me smarter for those business opportunities. So that's what I mean about being like just super intentional about, kind of almost starting family first or life first to look at those professional opportunities.
Yeah, and I love that mantra, and I share with my clients and talk to people in my community all the time about health and family first. So what it's doing, kind of just recognizing that sometimes we do have to stop and we're going to have to take care of those loved ones around us. And I think that's a really powerful message that you're sharing there. Tell us a little bit more about the process then. So some of the things you were saying in there, trying to understand, how did you know, or how are you getting to grips with, I don't think I'm going to be going back to another corporate role. What are the things that you've been doing that have kind of, other than the life circumstances? Because what most people will be thinking is, well, I'm in that position. I don't know what I'm going to do next. So there's a process you've been following. You've shared some of that with me. Perhaps tell us about that process.
Sure. And I think it could be very different for everyone. I really tried to take a step back because I think people like us and probably all of your clients and listeners, if you're watching these kind of self-improvement videos, you're intentional about your career and you have some ambition. And I think, and we tend to have a bias for action and we want things to happen quickly. And I think for me, a part of it from the beginning was to give myself time, to say that it doesn't have to happen. I don't have to know exactly what's next in 3 months or 6 months or necessarily even a year. It's more about the steps, that I'm taking and the insights that I'm getting or the epiphanies that I'm having, So I kind of started, you and I hadn't reconnected at this point, but I started working with a coach and, going back through, everything from Myers-Briggs to I went through they call your reflected best self, where you ask a bunch of friends and colleagues, and family, everyone in different aspects of your life, like who are you at your best self? That was really interesting because it's like having a 360, but they only tell you the good stuff. But a lot of those kinds of stimuli to just say, who am I when I'm at my best? Some sort of time study on when am I feeling really engaged? When am I feeling really energized? Those types of things. I mean, no one has a job usually or a profession where they enjoy every minute of the day, right? But certainly understanding those things where you really get fired up, back to the refiring, is helpful. So I went through some of that. There's actually a Stanford course called Designing Your Life, and the professors wrote a book called Designing Your Life, which is all about taking the sort of product development process that's used in high tech and many innovative companies today and applying it to your life. And I love that whole concept because I spent a lot of time in product innovation. So as soon as just the metaphor was there, I was like, oh, I got it. I love this. And one thing that I pull out that I thought was really interesting from that way of thinking is this concept of prototyping. When you're making a new product, right, you want to kind of prototype different solutions. You don't want to get too married to one, and you don't want to invest too much cost before you know if it's going to work, right? That's why everyone's always saying, do your minimum viable product and ship it and get feedback. But I think the concept of prototyping is awesome in life, and it's something we don't think about. It's always, grow up, know what your major is. Well, how are you supposed to know what your major is? You're preparing for a career and you haven't tried anything, So I think I love that, like with my girls being in college. And I feel like today, the advice to 20 somethings is like, use that decade to experiment and learn. And you don't have to invest too deeply necessarily in one area. If you know what you want to do and you're on that path, fantastic. But if you don't know, there's nothing wrong with that. Experiment. And so I'm trying to do some of that now. I look at like you took a huge pivot. I think about you a lot in terms of the pivot you've taken and how it really has integrated well with your life, your sense of purpose and meaning. You've told me about those things that you're doing. So I have a number of things I could do. And I'm trying to say, just take my filter. Here are the things I like. Here are the things I absolutely don't want to have in my sort of professional, investment. And narrow that as time goes on. Okay. So, no toxic people, some of the things that you hear all the time, like life is just kind of too short for that. I think if you can work on something that you're really passionate about and work with people that you're really passionate about, that's definitely a huge part of it for me. And then within that, I mean, I want to make a difference. It could be locally to people around me, but I am tend to gravitate towards some societal problems that are out there. So I kind of think about my mission is kind of to envision, evangelize, and affect, some solutions to some of society's largest problems. And I actually think the problem of aging seniors, which throws the population demographics way out of balance, and the lack of caregiving for them, and just the lack of services in general, is a big one. As an example, another example is, and it comes back to tying that family into professional, is my husband is a fractional CEO for a renewable energy startup. And my oldest daughter is in college. She's majoring in environmental science, double majoring, but that's her main major, environmental science. And she's very interested in saving the world. So their opportunity to work together, and she's actually interning for his company this summer, is awesome. And again, it's that opportunity, seeing them kind of work together and being able to lean into that while they're rebranding and standing up a website, using some of my past skills. It's awesome. For me, that's what I'm trying to do to tie it all together. That's part of my process is just keeping that filter of family and purpose as I explore, as I prototype and figure out, like, yeah, I think there's a there. This might not be it forever, but I want to do this. I'm going to explore this for now and see where it goes.
Is it absolutely awesome? You said so much. There's a lot to unpack. And my goal now is to spend the rest of our time unpacking that. There's so much into that. And I definitely want to come back to doing hard things, integrating with family, being yourself, doing yourself, loving what you do. I think we can dive into that a little bit later. I want to go back to some of the things you were saying at the beginning, which is you were talking about people like us who are kind of like energy. I hate that phrase, like-minded. We're like energy.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, we have that bias for action. But there'll be somebody watching this who is a senior executive, done 20 years, who took a lot of action and did lots of things. And maybe they're a C-suite executive now, maybe doing some fractional work. But they're asking themselves, well, that's all great and everything, but I'm facing these challenges. But I want to ask you about your challenges. So as you've gone through that coaching process and looking at your best self, what were the things that you uncovered about yourself that led to inaction or procrastination or you found difficult? Be good to share some of those.
That exercise really was like all the positives, so it was more like leaning into the strengths. I think as a general rule, for me, the thing that causes me to procrastinate if I do is there are just so many great opportunities out there. When you talk about designing your life, one of the things in that book and that course is, I think they spend a whole chapter trying to convince you that you can, in fact, think about 3 entirely different lives. And I'm thinking, yeah, I can think of 16. I mean, when I was going through that exercise, I wrote down 16. So it's like, you can't get analysis paralysis. Like the thought I have to put out of my head is this the very best thing I can be doing with my life? Because you have an infinite number of possibilities. And so, statistically, the chance that you're doing the one single best thing is actually pretty low. And that is not a great thought. So that's probably, if anything makes me hesitate or procrastinate, it's probably that thought of driving for, the best answer instead of a great answer.
One of the biggest things that I experienced, and maybe you experienced, of stepping outside of a 40 to 80 hour week, depending on where you are in feast and famine, is there's so much time, there's so much information that because we're high achievers, you end up with all this distraction and there's tons of lights and shiny whistles and bells and other things going off. And you think, yeah, I could do this and I could do that. So talk us through the filtering process maybe then that you've gone through because one thing you did was to say you've been taking your time and that giving yourself some grace to not rush this process. So designing your life in a particular way, not rushing it, but how have you been able to kind of focus your attention? What are the things that have what's your process for kind of gravitating in a particular direction? Because I think that's what people wrestle with the most is, there's so much things I could do. And because I think people know what they don't want.
Yes.
But the struggle is they don't know what they do want. And it's that. So how did you navigate your time and attention? Because I think that's the most important thing is where am I going to spend my attention?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think, I started with kind of like almost three pillars, if you will, or three potential pathways. One is, you mentioned it in the intro, doing board work, and I enjoy that. I sit on a couple of advisory boards and one nonprofit board, and I am exploring expanding that. That isn't necessarily a must. It's something I'm interested in. I feel it's a great way to give back. They call it board service for a reason. And I feel like all three of these paths have some way of giving back or paying it forward. And I think that gets back to that sense of meaning and purpose. And that's important to me. But that's been one. And in exploring that, I've done some education, types of coursework. I've done some networking, specifically associating with organizations and associations that include, board directors or aspiring board directors. And initially, when I started to do that, I was kind of putting it in this board lane, if you will. But what I learned is very quickly, I've become a part of a couple of networking groups or associations where, yes, there's a commonality in terms of a desire to expand board work, but it's, these are people, these are humans that all have social lives and leisure pursuits, and a lot of that, a lot of them are still active in non-board careers. And so I remember saying to my husband a couple of weeks into joining like this first one of these associations, like, this is going to be a great opportunity, whether I end up pursuing board work or not. These are just great humans, opportunity to help one another. So that's been great. And I actually use some of those networks and associations to also pursue the other two paths. And the other two paths for me were around, I've talked about them already, but renewable energy and around, or just environmental sustainability, probably it started out a little broader originally, and around the seniors and their caregivers. And I started kind of whittling those away a little bit. I have been leaning more into the seniors and their caregivers. When you have, both of those are huge markets. When we have unsolved problems, there's going to be commercial opportunity as well. So I think there is a tailwind to both of those in terms of, there being a way to sort of monetize, if you will, over time. But in the seniors and caregivers, for example, I've got a few different paths within that where I'm exploring putting together some content. You're a great content producer. I love all the stuff that you put out, and it's like, I love reading it. But I'm exploring content that could be helpful to family caregivers. I'm exploring a demographic study that helps uncover some things for California. I've hooked up with some college professors on that. And exploring some new kind of startups that are doing work in the space where I might do some advisory work. So that's, as I learn more, I've said no to a couple of projects. Then there's a couple of the ones that I just mentioned that I'm leaning a little bit harder into. So I think for me, the filter becomes, can I add value, and is it going to be rewarding to me? And there are a few of those where I felt like I'm not going to be happy day to day in that space. I find that depressing or uninspiring or whatever, but I can solve the problem from a different angle. So it's really been sort of trying some of these on in the prototyping way. And getting back to some of those things I find energizing around the networking and the communicating and the content producing that make me check some of those boxes.
All right. So recapping for people watching, listening to this, here's what I heard. And I think Kristen can just nod and say, yes, that's exactly right. Is that this process looks like this: taking stock to figure out where you're at now, where you've come from, identifying those strengths and those areas of preferred interests. I'll come back to that in a moment, because you then gave yourself some grace, is that I'm not going to rush anything here. I'm actually going to go through a process where I'm just going to be kind to myself and not have any aggressive timelines anymore, maybe like I did in the office. And that I'm not really driving numbers, or I'm not trying to please a customer. And what I love through that is then you got help. So you went to coaches, mentors, programs, associations, gathering data from a network. And I think that's what led you to the point of, well, I'm only really doing the things that I have a preferred interest in. And that led you into the board work you're doing. That's what's led you into the senior and caregiver work as well. I think that's a really good process for people to get down. So rewind that minute or two, or the last 5 minutes before, because that's what Kristen's walking us through. Is how do you do this when you're not quite clear about retirement, but you do want to do some refiring? I do want to ask you about the board work, because I get asked this by my communities a lot. How do I get on the board? So perhaps you've got a process or some advisory about resources, tools. What are the approaches? How do people get a board position? What's your experience?
Yeah, there are so many resources out there. And I think like Deloitte, for example, and they do this across the country, they have a free board readiness program, and they have a cohort in the fall and a cohort in the spring that you can join. And I think that's phenomenal. So I went through that recently, and also joined in with a couple of networking groups. Again, if you Google that, another national association, I participate in it. I'm actually on just recently accepted a board position on the nonprofit that is the Forum for Corporate Directors in Orange County here. And that's been a great one that puts on events, panels, educational stuff. It recognizes Director of the Year. There's another one called the Private Directors Association that really focuses on smaller kind of private companies and board work there, which is a great place to start. And that's a national organization. And so those are just some examples. But one thing I would say in terms of how do you get that board position, what everyone will say pretty universally is everyone agrees that the way that you're generally getting your board positions is through networking. It's letting everybody in your network know that you're looking, and it's starting to be crisp about your value and what the value is that you can bring to a board. Yeah. And there's a board bio that's like a kind of like a consolidated version of a resume, but looked through a board lens. So there's a whole process to it. But I think the important thing is, you don't join these networks because somebody's going to give you an opportunity. It's not their job to find you a board role. Likewise, the vast majority of the board roles, I don't know, somewhere between 60 and 80% aren't even posted. They're generally kind of who knows who. So when you start talking in those circles, someone will say, I got approached by this board role. It's not right for me, but I remember you said you're really passionate about this, or you've got this expertise. You might want to talk to them. So it's really the networking is the big thing. And there's so many resources out there to do it.
Yeah, that's cool. So recapping again, I think making sure you're networking with the right individuals and they know that you are in the market. I think that's a really key thing. But that would be the same professional relationships, the power of introducing to any opportunity, not necessarily a board one. And then that board bio bit, I'm assuming that kind of dropped out of your program of board readiness. Mm-hmm. And yep. I always think about what I'm seeing in the job market right now, a number of people suffering trying to find a job, and it's because they don't have job readiness. And so the reason why it's difficult isn't because there aren't opportunities for you. There are, but you haven't got a process set up for you that's going to get you in the right place. So if you're scrolling job boards and you're applying aimlessly to hundreds of thousands of things and getting ATS replies, it's going to be pretty unpleasant for you. And I think the same would be true based on what you said for board positions too.
Exactly. It's very similar.
There's this theme coming out that I want to kind of talk a little bit and ask you about, because I think it's important to some of the things you're saying. The reason I'm not hearing a lot of resistance in the conversation about refiring is because you're bringing a lot of play to this. You're not treating this as hard work. You're not treating this as laborious. You're actually like, no, I'm an explorer. Yes, Dora the Explorer. I'm exploring here, and I'm looking to bring play. So what role has that been that you adopted this position of playfulness, and that's helping you identify some of these places where you could make an impact?
That's exactly right. I think that point of like giving myself grace and giving myself time, I do want to kind of commercialize or monetize, some of these efforts, but I'm willing to wait. It might even be a few years. What if I partnered with someone and wrote a book, started a podcast, did this demographic study? I'm not going to get paid for that. But it made me smarter where in 2 to 3 years, I was starting something or joining something. I think what's enabled me to be playful is that sort of gift of time. And that has been, honestly, working a long career in a dual income household, saving. And when I left, saying, okay, you're working a fractional job, I'm working no job. So we now have, a third of a job or half of one job instead of 2 full jobs. What does that mean? We used to eat out all the time. I'm a terrible cook and a picky eater. And so that was kind of our vice, if you will. We didn't eat glamorously, but we ate out all the time. And it gets expensive. And I live in a tourist town. And so eating unglamorously is expensive. And so that was one thing we cut out. So we just looked at our budget and said, all right, this is what we need to live on. We don't want to dip into savings more than we have to. But, we have a little bit of cushion. So, what could the next year or two look like? And, I really had to sit down and go through the numbers and talk with my husband and say, we had like a family meeting, and just talk about like, how does all this work? So I think, doing that up front was important, because otherwise I think in me it would have been like, okay, well, what is it? What is it? What is it? You need to land it. What is that thing? And I think that that's just was not the process for me at this time to get to where I need to be fulfilled.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think there's some neat little things going on here about change, being a catalyst for change, or at least being an agent for change. This that kind of notion earlier, you talked about prototyping, having been in marketing, product, and customer experience type roles where you're testing all the time. And I think what I'm experiencing is most people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, or even in their 40s too, are testing a service-based business. So they could be a consultant, a coach, an author, expert practitioner, maybe drop shipped in to do some project work. They could be a podcast host. They could be a public speaker. Could be any of those things, and get paid for it, and then maybe reinvest that cash into something else to create courses and programs and education. Or there's this option of thinking about what would be a physical product that solves a problem. So I love some of the things that you said about that, but now you just mentioned family meeting. I'm going to do a tangent to family meetings. Tell us about your family meetings. I want to know about that. How does a family meeting go? Is there?
Well, we don't have any regularly scheduled ones. The last family meeting was, I guess you would call it, was more of an executive committee meeting, because it was my husband and me, and we're always talking about these things and touching base, but sometimes you just need the time to really deeply explore, especially since so many things are interrelated, right? Your finances are interrelated with your goals. And he and I would love to be in business together at some point down the road. So there's just a lot of things coming together. So we actually carved out a day, and we did this last 2 Fridays ago, I guess. And we spent the entire day. And it was funny. We thought about going off site, but we decided to stay here at this very table, and realized that we were getting a lot of interruptions in the kitchen, what's for dinner or whatever. And no, we're going to go. And so we went in another room and closed the door, and we had an agenda, and it was going through everything from, just finances, how have we been tracking, with our sort of like lower spend. We were looking at, we're changing our healthcare plan. So we had a little conversation about the timeline and process around that. A lot going on with the kids, what are the priorities there? We've got a month left of summer. What are we doing? So this one, I guess it was really more of like a leadership team meeting or something. But we went through all those before we even got to sort of the professional stuff. And then just took that opportunity for sort of like a deeper update than the daily chatter that we have about where we think these things that we're working on are going. And it sounds crazy, I think, sometimes to be that formal, but it's really helpful, because in those side chats that we'll have with the busyness of life, sometimes it's hard to really explore, well, how do you feel about that? Where do you think that's going?
Yeah. I think it's crucial. You're touching on something, with my communities and the work I do, I spend a lot of time, we have a whole module dedicated to measurement. How are you assessing your whole wheel of life? And you kind of talked about some of the things, what's going on with the family, what's going on with finances, how are we doing with health? And even to the point in health, the kind of planning meals, you mentioned it kind of jokingly, but planning meals out for the week or doing meal preparation is such a time saver to have thought about it in advance. I think those things are awesome. But you can extend all of this into multiple different areas. So I asked you because I wanted to hear that. And I think it dovetails nicely into how I help folks do measurement and having a whole life assessment. I coach people to do that on the first of every month. Where are you compared to where you were last month? And I think that's really powerful. So, not because we're bonkers and crazy, everybody. We want you to win. So we're doing that.
Exactly. What gets measured gets done, right? As they say.
Yeah, what gets measured. That's right. Yeah. I don't know if that's John Dewar or he has a book. The guy from Google on the OKRs, I forget what the book's called, What Measure Matters or something like that. Now, we talked about going to transition again now. So back from family meetings, we're back in the room, everybody, come back in. We talked a little bit about doing hard things. And I want to play a little bit maybe into your history as well as the present day, because a lot of people will be watching this and get to this point. And if you've got to this point, then you're in the top 1 or 2% of high performers. Congratulations. But we knew you would make it. What does it doing hard things look like now compared to what doing hard things looked like to you maybe a decade ago?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think those things might change over time. For me, if I think back, doing hard things, gosh, that's a great question. Like, how is the nature of the difficulty? How did that change? I guess probably earlier in my career, it was like, what's that new next step, that uncharted territory? I've never done whatever, never held that role or overseen a team that big or tiptoed into this discipline or something like that. And so taking on these new things, I mean, I love change and transformation. That's kind of what I love. So I greet those with excitement usually, but that doesn't mean they're not hard. And I think those are some of the biggest challenges, that it's that uncharted territory, right? Where you're doing new things, you're growing and expanding. It can also be the most rewarding, but I think that's hard. And so I would think they were more of those concrete changes that would happen in my career. You're going from this to this. Now the hard things are they're less concrete, they're more abstract, they're more philosophical. The hard things are probably like in here, and maybe they always were or always should have been, but maybe, in trying to become a more enlightened person, the hard things are, getting past some of those stories that you tell yourself. Or some of the narrative, I try to think a couple things about being at this stage of life, middle-aged. It's, first of all, I try to look at how many years you have ahead, because it's so easy to think, oh my gosh, I'm running out of time, or I'm so old, or, what am I going to do next, or whatever. But really, of course, knock on wood, we know that either, any of us could die tomorrow. So we definitely need to have fun in the present. But I also like to think there's an opportunity that I could live several decades more. And that gives me an opportunity. And it doesn't have necessarily much to do with what's happened thus far in life. So I could start completely over. If I were born today, but with this, knowledge and this interest and all of that, what would I do? And so I think the hard things are kind of like putting aside past narratives, getting beyond any limiting thoughts, or maybe even the thought that might say to hurry up, or that instinct to, yes, somebody came to me with this opportunity. It sounds amazing. Okay, slow down, think about it. Does this align with your whole path? So the harder work now, I feel like, is a little more mental, I guess.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is more meaning. We get
more meaning as well.
I have this little quote: "Is most people don't realize how short and precious life is until they do."
Yeah, exactly.
And then they suddenly wake up and go. And most, if not all, of the people in the community will come and say, I want a legacy. I want more impact. I want more meaning. I want more fulfillment. None of them come to me and say, I want more money. I say, that's good, because when you're lying on your deathbed, none of your kids or any of your loved ones are going to say, we just wished you made more money. They might be thinking it because they've got their own issues going on, but that's not what they're going to be saying. They're going to be saying, you're a good mother, you're a good wife, you're a great community leader, you did great things for our family, we had these great experiences. And it's that. I think what you're talking about is trust in your ability to figure out that you can create more meaning. And that's what I'm hearing when you're speaking, is just kind of nailing that there'll be, you can come up with false limiting beliefs. People say, oh, well, it's fear of the unknown. And I don't know if I could leave my company because I'm scared of the unknown. You're not scared of the unknown. You're scared of you and leaving your identity behind in that company. It's a completely different thing to be scared about, but it's also legit and valid. So I want to talk about what I call marginal decade. I think that's a really useful concept for people to hear from you. You get to this mid-age life. I'm at level 51. I just turned level 51 on Sunday. And so when I think about it as levels, it's just more badass that way. You get to the point of, okay, well, what would be that marginal decade? Do I want to be in my 80s, 90s, and so on? How have you thought about that as kind of maybe conversations with your husband? Have you picked out, I think it's going to be 90s. I think I might break through 100. Have you defined it that far? And if you have, what did you reverse engineer, if anything?
That's a great question. I don't know that we've got it figured out quite that much, but if you do the math that says, okay, you're going to live till 90 and you really didn't start being adult till 20 or 25, as you get older, you cheat that number up.
27
right?
For this guy.
There you go. But so, or so say, keep the math good. So you're going to live till 95 and you became, you started adulting at 25, let's call it, right? So you've got 70 years in there, the midpoint is 35 years in, right? So that's like when you're 60. So it's like 60 is really like, well, haven't gotten to the halfway point of my adult life. Like, why are people talking about retiring and thinking it's over? Now, granted, we're not going to be probably in the same state the day before we drop as, we are now in terms of our like energy. God willing, there's probably a lot of good years, hopefully a lot of good years left in there. So I think just keeping that mindset opens up so much more opportunity than when you start thinking, yeah, I got a decade more to retirement. What should I squeeze in there? Like my husband and I are very similar, like-minded and like energied, I think, in terms of as long as it's something we're passionate about, we want to put our energy towards things. We have a lot of energy and that's fun for us. And so I don't think we've thought about it in terms of those decades. I don't know. Do we not want to tempt fate or something? But I think in terms of the aggregate, we do think a lot about the aggregate of the years ahead of us and what that could mean. And financially, we have kind of tried to plan out, what that looks like. Because the longer you live, right, the longer you need to be making some money. And so we have tried to look at it that way. But I think the biggest point for me is just looking at how much time you might have left, because I think sometimes it surprises people that are in their 50s or their 60s. They're perfectly healthy and have a ton of energy, that really there could be a lot of time left to do those things that maybe you think, you never did. Well, do them.
Yeah, I don't think you needed to answer the question about the decade or the exact day, but you answered it in a different way, which is to talk a little bit about with advancing healthcare and generative AI now and some of the things that are going to be coming into the healthcare space that technology will provide to us. There's a really good chance that everybody's probably going to get another decade just because of the amount of new medicine and new methodologies that are going to allow to live that healthier lifestyle. I look at some of the people in my life who are coming up to 80 now. They do not look like an 80-year-old looked to me 10 or 15 years ago.
Exactly.
And most of my grandparents were pretty much gone before 81, 82, but there's no sign of seeing my, certainly on the male side of my family, the parents living a lot longer than that. And you mentioned your dad.
Right.
So I think that's right. And that's why I think this theme of refiring, not retiring, is so important, especially given some of the stats around most productive decade. The most productive decade is 60 to 70 for any human.
I didn't even know that. I'm not aware of that statistic. That's very inspiring.
The second most productive decade is 70 to 80.
That's awesome. How's that measured?
But I know what's causing it. What's causing it is time's running out. So people are becoming much more productive. What does it look like? It looks like this refiring of people doing more things. So, people writing their book before they're gone to leave their legacy. People are speaking on stage, joining communities, joining associations, being part of networks, traveling around the country, doing stuff that they absolutely love.
Bucket list.
Yeah, in a bucket list way, being communication. It kind of leads me to my next topic of conversation here, because you've been talking a little bit about, and what I hear from you, and this is what it is. What I'm hearing is a little bit of trying to be in flow state as often as possible. And what do I mean by that? Well, everybody's self-sabotaging with their limited beliefs or some of the things they do every day to escape life, gaming, endless TV binging, alcohol, cigarettes, porn, or all the stuff that goes on. But what I've been hearing from you is that you're doing your best to be yourself, to do what you want to do, to love that thing, and then also to do it with people you want to hang out with. Perhaps talk a little bit about that. What's been the triggers, or what are some of the emotional things going on for you that have just found you in more of that flow state? How do you think you've got there?
I think you talked earlier about, just kind of taking stock of some of the different areas of your life. And I did that. I went through and said, how do I feel about my home, my marriage, my immediate family, my extended family, my friends and my social life, my work, my, community and volunteer activism, my faith, whatever, all those, different kind of aspects of life. Where are you on them? Kind of rate them, sort of 1 to 10. And where do I need to give more attention? I don't even know if I said my health in there, but definitely had health in there. And, I think that's something that I always tried to keep in mind. But when you're really pressed for time, if you have a kind of a high pressure job and it just simply takes up a lot of hours of the day or the week, it's hard to get to some of those things. And now I feel like I've been able to dive deeper into, almost every single one of those areas. And I think that kind of helps me stay in a state of flow, because I feel like I'm balanced. Whereas before, I used to think some things suffered, even if they didn't suffer completely, they just weren't where I wanted them to be. And I'd even chastise myself at times. Oh, you're bad about writing thank you notes, or you're not good about keeping in touch with your aunt over here, or whatever it might be. And as soon as I had a little more time, I realized, oh, I'm not bad at those things. I'm naturally doing those things now. Like, I want to do them. So I think, having that balance has really helped get the voice out of the head that's like, you're not operating over here, or you're neglecting this thing over there. And I think having that balance is kind of a foundation. When I want to go deep, it just feels very freeing, if that makes sense. You're doing a great job, like taking my words and making sense of them. So if you could do that again, please, that'd be great.
It's your expression. So your creative expression comes through by the way you express it. So, yeah. And I've got this kind of other phrase, all opinions are valid, so it doesn't matter if I have to change your opinion. I think it's good. I want to transition to something else you'd said, and we've got a couple more topics that kind of come up in this conversation.
Sure.
Because I think something you said, which is kind of beautiful, really, is this notion that you could create something as a family, not just with your husband, but you talked about your daughter as well. And the topic of renewable energy came up in that conversation. Perhaps talk a little bit about why that's meaningful to you, because I think a lot of people would perhaps like to replicate that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it feels like a circular idea, this idea of doing something for the family, because I've never been one of those people that wants to have an outsized influence on my kids' career, in the sense that living some life I didn't live, or this is the right way to go, or whatever. Neither of, my husband and I met in MBA school, and we've mostly been doing businessy things, ever since. And both of my girls are pretty turned off by that. They're both incredibly creative. They will probably find that they know that they will be making a living, but they've got some very interesting ways that they're thinking about going around and doing that. Right. And I love that. And so I guess my point there is, it'd be great if, we had a family business at the end of the day, but at the same time, that would never be an expectation for my kids. That might be an opportunity for my kids, but that would have to be something that they would want to lean into. And if that weren't something that they were interested in, then, maybe it would help provide a legacy in a different way. But I think by exploring those things we're all interested in, there's just that opportunity for the synergy there and the opportunity to spend more time together. My youngest, who I haven't brought up, she's a very talented singer and actress, and she's creative in every kind of way. And she's trying to figure out how that works into her, future career. And I have a lot of sort of, advertising and content creation background that can tend to overlap in that space a little bit. So, doing some networking and exploring with her there to kind of support her. So I think it just gets back to that kind of prototyping and exploring and seeing where there's the overlap. If I'm leaning into the things that they're interested in, there's just going to be more chance that we find something professionally that works as a family. And if not, at least I'm spending more time with them. So I'm good. I win either way.
So let's go to the senior and the caregiver piece, because you were talking about that. What do you notice? Because you were talking about some of the problems there, and I'd love to hear from your perspective, having gone through the journey with your dad, right, recently. What did you notice about that? And what else did you start to notice in that, maybe in those communities where you were like, these are real places where there could be some massive change? What kind of things would you be looking at?
I've done a lot of, kind of interviews of people that participate in different areas in the space. And there's a lot of attention given to elder care. And I'm not necessarily, although I've done some, I interviewed the director at my parents' senior living place, for example. But, there's a lot kind of going on in that space. But I've tended to be very interested in sort of the middle-aged family caregiver and the support that's there for them, because there are millions of unpaid caregivers, in this country, some of whom spend their time full time, caring for an aging parent or grandparent, and many millions more who spend part of their time doing so. And we always think about the healthcare, and that's part of it. But, a lot of what I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years is, standing up a new technology answer for my parents, new cell phones, new laptop, new printer. I've got my nephew's like an IT guy. He can get he can tap into my mother's screen when she gets stuck on Amazon and something, her credit card's not being taken, whatever it might be. He can see her screen and help her through that. I manage the medication list for like the 16 medications that my dad's on and put together like a whole spreadsheet. And I just send it to their printer before every medical appointment they have. And they walk it in because the first thing they're asked is, what medications are you on? And I'm not sure how a 95-year-old guy is supposed to remember 16 medications. It's been a little bit of technology. It's been the finances. We've taken over doing their taxes and things like that. But there's just all these different aspects that require, in some cases, my husband happens to have grown up as a CPA, so that's very helpful in that regard. But there's just all of a sudden, you might find yourself in a situation where you've got to help your aging parents do some of these things. And it's overwhelming if you weren't planning on that. And it can be very time consuming. And it might even require expertise that you don't feel that you have, not to mention, conversations with other family members. So trying to pull that all together is something that I see, and having more resources for the family caregiver that's trying to help, I see is a big gap. I also think there's going to be, housing is another area I'm very passionate about and interested in, and just really starting to look into. But take California, incredibly expensive housing. People are getting older. They don't, they want to live independently. ADUs, additional accessory dwelling units are becoming big. Is there an opportunity there, for seniors? So that's a space that I'm kind of looking into to bring families closer. So those are just a couple of examples of areas that I've been more passionate about to help the family caregiver and help the aging person have a better quality of life. Those are kind of like my two filters.
Well, we'll keep the theme towards the end here, more on you and finding out a little bit about more you, so people can learn specifically about Kristen and who you are. I wanted to ask you this maybe kind of cheesy podcast question, maybe, or is, if you could have dinner with three people, who would they be? They can be living, they can be dead. I'm not going to do that. My cheesy question is going to be, if you're on a plane, who would you like to be sat next to that you could have a conversation with?
The first person that comes to my mind is Malcolm Gladwell.
All right.
I like his books, and I don't know, I've always been kind of intoxicated by the intersection of sort of data, statistics, demographics, et cetera, and psychology. When you can combine like human psychology and behavior, which is sort of not always logical, with data that follows more logical patterns. I just think that's a really interesting place. So I've read a few of his books, and I'd hope I would do a transcontinental flight to get the most out of that one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, as I was going to say, it's definitely a 7 or 8 hour trip. It's not a short trip. Yeah. And so for people watching, if you don't know Malcolm Gladwell, a couple of 3 books you could probably pick up: Blink, Outliers, Tipping Point. All of those would be good places to start, because that's the author we're talking about.
Yep.
Lots of different ways of thinking and viewing the world. So I think that's awesome. All right, so then let's talk about, when people come to you for advice, what's the question you get asked the most?
Probably the most is around things that are sort of managing people or people situations or people sticky, kind of people problems. And I think that's kind of the biggest job of leadership there, is it's really all about the people and understanding their superpowers, and, making the culture a collaborative one, and with, close to zero toxicity as humanly possible. So I'd say I probably get the questions, they might be more career oriented, but it's generally around managing through, could be politics, it could be with peers, it could be with difficult situations with employees. But yeah, it tends to be around the people area.
Anything you would give as maybe a favorite quote or a piece of advice for those questions?
One thing I think is just so important, we've been talking about it on this call, but is a lot of times leadership is working to make sure the team understands the strategy that's happening, and maybe ideally involving them in that. But the meaning sometimes is lost. I worked at a company you'd be familiar with in the healthcare space that focused on the financial and administrative aspects of healthcare. And it was so easy to think, oh, the clinicians are the ones saving lives. But we helped get your care authorized. And if that gets held up, that can be lethal for people. And so just things like that, bringing the meaning, the humanity into the job, I think sometimes gets lost. And I think that's a really important one that I feel like comes up a lot in my conversation.
I always think about in people and handling difficult situations or circumstances that come up in human interaction. I always think of, I don't know if this was Buddha, but it's attributed to him. It's like holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So noticing how your own emotional
That's so great.
regulation, how is your own emotional regulation impacting this environment? Yeah. So I always make it about, I think one of my good friends, Dr. Laura in the UK, had said to me once, James, every external problem is an internal problem. So you're basically saying, you're the issue.
Exactly.
No one else has got the same issue you have. So let's try and resolve that. All right, well,
That's
let's
so
wrap this
right.
up. Yeah, let's wrap this up. I wanted to ask you this, maybe to kind of finish on a healthy note. So with everything we're thinking about, refiring, not retiring, what is the legacy that you want to be known for?
I guess ultimately I'd like to be known for, kind of paying it forward in different ways. I think the most joy that I get out of any given day, and I do a little gratitude journaling, is helping people. It could be family, it could be in the business sense. But it's I guess very cliched, but just making a difference, feeling like you're having an impact, and I would want people to say from their vantage point, whatever that is, that I had some impact.
Well, thank you very much. We come to the end of our time. It's amazing how fast almost an hour can go. Like
That's
just chatting,
crazy.
just having a fireside chat about
That's
everything.
crazy.
We haven't spoken about half the things we spoke about today, but
Exactly. No, it's been great.
for those people watching, I think you get something from this, and you can keep this. Make sure you save it. Like and subscribe to the channel, whatever you need to do, so you can come back and watch this again. I just want to let you know that if you like this video, then there will be another video that you can go to right now and click in and learn a little bit more about how you can manage your career, how you can think about retirement, or how you can just manage your leadership and think about how you can make a bigger impact in this world. So I'll see you right there in this video.